swap it whenever.
Yep. So we're live now on Twin Cities Apologetics Live.
Hey, yo.
Yeah. Sorry if you were paying attention earlier with our last feed. We tried using the Facebook software itself, but it didn't allow us to do what we want to do. So we're going to try this, see if it works.
So now we can like swap both to the video and our faces. I thought it was just going to be video, and I thought that was going to be fine. But
Yeah.
some people say that I have a good face for radio. I don't know if that's going to translate over to this. So
Yeah.
You all can judge.
You have a good face for Facebook Live. That's what I say.
Oh, thank you.
Nate, can you check our feed and make sure we're coming through? That'd be awesome. Okay, so like we're kind of explaining, a big feature of our night is going to be video. And the reason for that is we're going to be looking at atheist views on free will. So last time we met, we talked about Christian views on free will, like the different views that are out there, Calvinism, Molinism, Arminianism. And we saw that a lot of Christians do affirm the existence of free will, which basically means that between, let's say, two choices, you are free to choose one or the other, as long as you're within the proper physical constraints that, are part of our lives, of course, with the laws of nature and whatnot.
Right. I like to be a pro football player, but I don't think that's in my genetics. So I think that's like outside of the free choice that I'm able to make.
Exactly. Okay.
Well, I don't think I want that actually. So I changed my mind.
Well, after that last Super Bowl and how boring it was, I don't think any of us want to be football players right now. Anyway, so as you can see, there's a comment section, and we can see comments as they're coming through. For some reason, we can't see who's posting them, but we'll just go with it with what we have. So we're going to start with a little introduction and give people a chance to come on board that way. And I think I'll invite people kind of through our different channels as well. But one thing to note is that we've been announcing this potential public debate that may take place this November. We're working out details. We're very much in the beginning stages of planning out formal debates, which would be very exciting. And one of the people that will be involved if it happens is Frank Turek, one of the best and most well-known Christian speakers and debate people out there. So that would be really exciting. I don't think he's done a debate in Minnesota before, unless it was way long ago. So that would be really awesome. And there will also be a prominent atheist figure involved in that, and we don't want to officially announce anything on air right now because we are in the beginning stages. But that's something to look forward to, and we want to bring this up too because we will, if this happens, we will need help. Like something this big of an event, one or two people can't deal with the whole thing. So
Twin Cities Apologetics needs you,
yes,
America.
Yes, come on down. That's another show. Forget it.
Yeah.
So just keep that in mind. We may request for help or perhaps put together a committee to put on this exciting event, which could very well be something that God uses to bring a lot of people in the cities closer to Christ, and that's why we're very excited about it.
And it's going to be fun. Let's not forget that.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So thanks for commenting, everyone, so far who has. We're going to be especially looking at comments later in this feed. So before we start, I'm going to post on the page and so let people know this is going on. But Matt, do you want to explain just a little bit about our ministry and like the background and kind of the purpose of it just for a minute? Cool.
Yeah, so we're Twin Cities Apologetics. We're here to help equip believers in defending their faith. So we go through series where we talk about specific topics, help people think through those and engage others. We're also here to help people who have doubts and how to work through those. What we found, I found a lot, is that there's a lot of people who kind of have soft doubts or hard doubts, and they just don't pursue them, and they don't get resolved at all. So we just wanted to facilitate some ways to help people think and engage them with a great community to help grow their faith, and hopefully bring people in who don't have that Christian faith and help them grow. I think we started, almost a little over a year ago, and it's been great.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. So
yeah, we just saw a need, and I wanted to start an apologetics group in college, and same with Jeremy, and we both go to the same church, and we started talking. It's like, oh, this other person wants to start an apologetics group. Why don't we do it together? So we thought about that in like October 17, and we started in January 2018, and it's just been growing, and it's been a lot of fun. So I'm glad you guys could join with us. So I think for the agenda tonight, we're just going to watch some videos, have some dialogue. I don't know if you guys can chime in besides the comments, so hopefully you don't mind my voice too much, or Jeremy's for that matter.
Yeah.
But it will be fun.
So this will also give you a preview of our night of dive typically and what that's like for our meetings. So that'll be really cool. And just so you all know, this is a meeting generally geared towards Christians in coming together, being able to discuss their thoughts, their doubts, whatever the case might be. So in light of that, we take a time for prayer during the meeting. So I want to open us up before we begin, just with a quick time of prayer. So I will do that, and then we'll start up. So, Lord, thank you for this time of being able to come together, whether it's in person or online, in discussing this important topic of free will and how humans are involved in that process of being able to choose, or maybe not being able to choose. I pray that you help us in this conversation, in some of the views that we're going to be hearing, that your truth prevails through that, and that you guide us by your spirits as we cover this topic of free will. I pray this in your name. Amen.
Amen.
Cool. So let's start up with watching some videos of atheists that are very popular out in culture and on YouTube and different places that you look. And we're going to see what their view on free will is, or at least a snippet of it, because sometimes with this free will topic, it can get very complicated and it can take a long time to explain. So we don't have time to watch an hour-long video, but we do have time for 2-minute clips to get kind of a grasp of these people's views. And then we can have a discussion from there. We'll also see some videos from Christians kind of responding to some of the ideas that we'll be seeing. Okay, so first of all, I'm going to go to a video here. And it might just take a bit to figure out what's going on here, so
yeah,
excuse that.
Jeremy's kind of a noob at this, so
yeah, exactly. Okay, I think I know what's going on here. All right, so we're gonna see Richard Dawkins first, and just see what he thinks on this topic. Of course, this is one of the most popular atheists in
I
history.
suppose, Dr. Dawkins, I would ask this to you: Is there a scientific basis for the concept of free will in human beings? And if not, is there a biological evolutionary reason why all of us believe we have free will?
The late Christopher Hitchens, when asked, does he believe in free will, replied, "I have no choice." It's a question that I dread, actually, because I don't have a very well thought out view about it. I think that, I have a materialist view of the world. I think that things are determined in a rational way by antecedent events. And so that commits me to the view that when I think I have free will, when I think that I'm exercising free choice, I'm deluding myself, that my brain states are determined by physical events, and yet that seems to contradict, to go against the very powerful subjective impression that we all have, that we do have free will. I think all I can do is recommend the works of my colleague Daniel Dennett on the subject, which are.
Yep, so let's pull it back to the feed here. And so what we saw there was Richard Dawkins, obviously giving his view. And one of the things he said was basically when he is saying that I have free will, that he's deluding himself by saying that. And he says that his brain states are determined by physical events. So our first question that we want to ask is, what does he mean by that? That our brain states are determined by past events. If you have any comments towards that, kind of what you think he's saying, definitely post that in the comments. But Matt, do you have any thoughts about that point, kind of like what he's saying by past events kind of is what is the is what leads to the determination?
Right, and so in his view, I think that he does believe in determinism, in that him thinking that he would have free will is still in the determined realm. But for him, having those brain states, I think he's trying to subscribe to just a pure materialistic world where you have material, you have reactions, and our brains are matter, and that passes through time, right? So you have causation. All of those causes stem from prior events, and those just propagate down through time. Mm-hmm. So I think on his view, because it's just materialism, all of those causes just propagate through time. And I think if you trace those back, you find that first cause. And when you look into the brain and the neuron and the synapses, he's like, you look down at that level and you don't see free will. You just see electrons moving, and it's not like they're changing, and it's not like they just appear. They always stem from something prior, and I think that's kind of what he's trying to get at. That there's some state, the world's determined. It's always just going to propagate through to what that is kind of programmed to do. In
right.
Sense.
So the idea is, if you take all the prior events that led to this decision that Dawkins is making, if you the common example is if you just put that all in a supercomputer, just throw all that data in there, then if you run some sort of program, then the output of that will be that exact decision that Dawkins makes. So basically, the decision is driven by the sum of all of those past events. Mm-hmm. And in that sense, it's not really our free choice. It's just a result of what's already happened. Mm-hmm. There is one comment here about basically what is Dawkins talking about. Aaron here says the brain forms the reactions based on prior experience of the self in nature. So that's a little bit different in that it's not necessarily all the past events in history, but the self and what the self has experienced and the prior events in one's life is what leads to that reaction or that decision, whatever it is. Mm-hmm. So that's basically what Dawkins is saying in that little bit that we went through.
Yeah, and I think it's on a scientific worldview. I think it's very easy to pull oneself into that. Like from my view, I work in science. I know that things just aren't random. Like we have equations and laws, and they work very well. So it just seems like this event caused some other one, and like my whole job is to find those things that are very stable and quantify them, and then use them to my own means to sell a product and run a test. So he's just taking those like very small areas and like using that as aggregate for the totality of the whole world. So I think that's kind of where he's getting at, and I think it's a easy thing to fall into. If that makes sense.
Yeah, totally. And I didn't respond to one comment earlier that asked about kind of why we're doing this, and a big reason is because of the weather outside in Minnesota. What do you know? It's unpredictable. It actually started snowing as I was coming here before our meeting, and it's just been a mess the last few days. So we thought, don't want to put people in hazard, especially coming back from the meeting, and people tend to not be motivated to come out during times like this anyway. So that's kind of the reason for this feed. Yeah, I think that there's one more comment, but we'll go on to our response. And basically, our next question to this is it a problem to say that when we think we have free will, we are deluding ourselves? So again, if you have a comment about that, feel free to post. But while we're doing that, we're going to listen to a response to that question from a well-known Christian, and that is William Lane Craig, as many of you probably know of. So we're going to share the screen again here and play that video for you all.
Well, it seems to me that on your view, free will is ultimately illusory because everything we do is determined by what goes on the fundamental level. And therefore, even though I have the illusion of free will, if I could really understand it, I would see that in fact I'm determined to do everything that I do, including believing in determinism, which makes my choice to believe in determinism, it seems to me, irrational, or irrational, I should say. I'm simply determined to believe in determinism. So I don't think it's helpful to talk about free will as an emergent reality when at a fundamental level you're affirming determinism. Then it's freedom only in name and not in reality. And in that case, I think the questioner is right. It's very difficult to see how anything I do is rational. It's just like a tree growing a branch. It's all determined by mindless forces.
Sorry, we're unmuting and muting sound, so that can happen. But I was saying, Lane Craig is responding to another kind of idea that an atheist had, but he does cover that topic of free will being an illusion and why that's a problem. So, yeah, feel free again to comment anything you have to say about that idea of free will being an illusion. Matt, do you have any comments to make kind of on that point? If that's a problem.
Right, yeah, and I think what Craig wants to get at here is that when you're determined fully, you're no longer able to understand, choose beliefs if they are right or wrong or correct or not, because you're not able to form statements in a sense, and you're determined for all of your conclusions. And I think that
yeah, we have a little technical problem there. Okay. You want to get?
Yeah, I think we're good.
Okay. Sounds good. So I just kind of lost my thought there, but basically, one problem is the idea of rationality, that we look at evidence, that we form a basis of what is true, what is real, based on the evidence, and then come to a conclusion about some truth claim or maybe about some life decision that we need to make based on what we know. Well, if we are determined to make a certain decision or come to a certain conclusion, such as that determinism is true, well, And that kind of cuts out that whole that process, it seems, of bringing together different pieces of data and coming to a proper conclusion and decision as a result. So as I think I like the term that Craig used, irrational, because some people say, oh, it's irrational to think this. Well, that has kind of a negative connotation of, oh, you're not thinking properly, or this is the opposite of reason or something. So I think just using irrational as a word, in that this is kind of neutral when it comes to using using rationality, that is really absent of that opportunity or ability. I think that's just a really good way to put it on Craig's part.
Right, yeah, because it's not that you're making like a wrong logical step, it's that the basis for the logic kind of falls away from beneath your feet, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So one thing that, again, Aaron commented on here is the problem is when a raindrop hits resistance, it changes its path. Can we be agents to change that rain path as an agent, or are we a resistance by fact, not choice? So kind of an interesting image to consider with nature. And, nature is taking its course, but we as free agents, can we kind of use our free agency or free will to change that's kind of what's happening in nature in some sense? Like when we step outside, we are interacting with nature by our actions. So yeah, it's just kind of interesting to think about that. So I may be reading another comment, and then by Aaron, but Joshua here says, also, why argue? If it's deterministic, then debate is pointless. So that is a good point. And I'm trying to think of this crazy scenario, but Joshua is saying, in a debate, the idea, at least in a lot of cases, is that you're trying to get the other person to change his or her mind on the issue, or get them to think in a different way that is more in line with your view. But if determinism is true, if we are just kind of going off of our past experiences and have no free will with being able to make choices or being able to use rationality, then making those arguments and trying to lead someone in a different direction is like, I don't want to say pointless, but it doesn't really make sense, the whole concept of debate. Yeah.
I think from like an emotional standpoint, it's like, oh, I don't want to go and do that because it's just determined. But I think like if you're already determined to do it, and it has a positive influence on that person, like there's still a point to it. But I think for a motivation, you're not going to find a whole lot in a deterministic framework, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Not that trying to find, something to motivate you is the right basis for choosing whether free will is a thing or determinism, but I think that there can still be a point under determinism. But it kind of makes you fall under.
Yeah, so my kind of crazy scenario was, let's say you have this debate and you do change someone's mind. Well, you were determined to have the debate, and then the other person was determined to end up changing their mind. So I don't know, isn't that kind of the same result or the same process as the person not changing their mind? Like, doesn't make a difference what the outcome is if it's all determined? Just some questions to think about. We're not saying that we have, the complete answer, or that's where you're fully expressing the other view. But these are just questions to ponder when it comes to the question of determinism. So let's move on to another prominent atheist and their view on this issue. And that is not one of the four horsemen, as some of you might be familiar with, of new atheists, but someone who is definitely up there in on YouTube and in other places, and that is Matt Dillahunty. So these next two videos that we are going to watch are quite similar because Matt's actually explaining another atheist's view. So we're just going to watch kind of both of those pretty quickly. but we'll take some time to digest and discuss afterward. So let's go to that.
But I do think that we have something that's worth calling free will, partly because it's something that we care about. And so the easiest way I can describe what I'm talking about, which doesn't violate the physical laws of the universe and doesn't appeal to anything magical, is Don, could get up and walk out of the room right now, or I could drag Don out of the room when he doesn't want to leave. The difference between those two scenarios, even though in both of them he ends up out of the room, but the difference between those two is what we're going to call free will. This doesn't mean that you could have violated the natural order or anything like that. It is a way of recognizing that there are thinking agents who interact, and that you have this meat sack that I am has some desires, and those can come in conflict with others. And under that model, then we can hold me responsible for dragging Don out, or hold Don responsible for walking himself out. And that's primarily what we care about when we talk about free will.
Well, why call that free will? That's not what the Christians say. That's not what the Muslims say.
Yes.
That's not what the Mormons say.
Yeah, and I don't care, because I reject their notions of free will. What Dennett is talking about is what people have cared about forever. And that is, hey, if there's no free will, how can you possibly hold anybody responsible for anything? And what he's saying is all the things that you care about, which is why the subtitle was The Varieties of Free Will Worth Wanting. And trust me, I am reluctant to speak on behalf of Dan. We've only traded a couple emails. I hope to have a conversation with him about this at some point. But what he's essentially saying, to my understanding, is we care about being able to hold agents responsible in relation to their understanding of the consequences of their actions and the moral evaluation of those. And we can, because I'm a thinking agent who either dragged Don out or he got up and walked out on his own. And apart from that, all the things that most religions talk about with regard to free will is magical thinking garbage that I don't think is real and have no use for.
I'm going to teach you what you need.
If you shop on Amazon...
Well, this is interesting. Okay.
Ooh, let's get a Keurig, Jeremy.
Yeah, I'm up for that. All right, so you see Matt Dillahunty with his kind of feisty tone towards the end there. Well, so one question we have on that is, what did he describe, or how does Matt Dillahunty describe free will? So just some observations from myself first. Again, you can definitely comment what you think he's saying in that. But basically he's saying that we only really need to focus on one or maybe a few at the most aspects of free will and what it means. And that's the things that we really care about, that really apply to our lives. So what he said towards the end there basically summarized what his view is on something that we might be able to call free will. Mm-hmm. And that's that we know that we are thinking agents, that we have that ability. So we can thus take action, as a result of that thinking, and thus can be held responsible, or in some cases morally responsible, mm-hmm. for those actions. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, he was talking about will and us being thinking agents, and I think that he's not exactly talking about free will. I think he's just talking about will, mm-hmm. in general. That like he's still affirming a deterministic worldview. So there's no such thing as free on. I guess I'm not. So there's compatibilism, which says there can be free will and determinism, and I guess that's kind of what he's espousing in that world view. So I think from what I'm hearing him say is that he's still supporting that we have wills because we're thinking agents, and that thinking is the emergence from all of those neurons firing, which is a little bit what was talked about in that last video with Craig and Sean Carroll. Mm-hmm. And Craig talked about the emergence, that our consciousness is the emergence of all of these neurons firing, therefore that is a will, and we can hold that will responsible for something. But I think if you just go on that view, just having this emergence, I still don't think that's a basis for holding someone morally responsible, because they still are determined for those things. I don't think that drives an ought in morals or ethics. I think it might say like, oh, you it's not good to do that, but I don't think you can say like you ought to do that in a sense, because you still have your own will, and you're also still determined. So like if you knew that there was something good and bad, and your life and your nature determined that you're going to do all these other things, like it in that sense, it still doesn't matter if you're a thinking agent, because you're going to do them regardless. You might just think you have that free will, but I guess I'm not a compatibilist, so.
Sure. Yeah, so I guess a question is, Matt Dillahunty there was talking about, well, we're thinking people, we can make choices, we can think about our actions and decisions. Well, I guess the question is like, what is lying underneath that? Kind of what Matt was saying. What is the basis behind that? And if you did kind of continue exploring Matt's view or Dillahunty's view and ask questions, you would see that he does affirm many of the tenets of determinism, of kind of like Dawkins was describing, past actions leading to what we end up doing or deciding. So it's not very clear to me. I would have to explore Dillahunty's view more on how that fits, how he can say that, well, we have free will in the sense that matters, but there is still this deterministic world that we live in, on his view. So yeah, that's something to explore more.
Yeah, so I'm just wondering if he's trying to come at free will from a pragmatic standpoint, that he realizes like, oh, if it is all determined, then how are we going to hold people responsible for these hideous acts? And he's like, oh, well, we still have wills, and we're still thinking agents, therefore we can hold them responsible. So yeah. I feel like that's kind of like the driver for that worldview, but I guess I'm not either of those guys, so I shouldn't be speaking for them. And I'm not sure if I am a compatibilist either, so.
Sure. Yeah, and it's good to, again, explore these views in this topic. It is very complicated, and we don't have to necessarily come to a conclusion, even as Christians, of, oh, this is my hard stance regarding free will. But this is something that's good to at least think about, and probably something that a lot of people haven't even considered in their life. And we're going to talk about later about why that's important when it comes to our conversations with other people and with non-Christians especially. So I was laughing earlier at Aaron's,
some good comments.
Aaron's comments that we have a sponsorship. Yes, we have Keurig, the official sponsor of Twin Cities Apologetics. Congrats to us. Hooray. Yeah, so we're going big. That's all.
Super big, yeah.
Yeah, and then he said this thinking idea sounds a lot like magic. So kind of like I was explaining, what is the basis of that we're thinking people, or does it just kind of appear out of nowhere, or pop into existence out of nothing, like Craig says.
On a side note, I took a class last year, and it talked about, are Keurig cups moral? Because they fill up like 320 Astrodomes every year, and it's like, oh my gosh. So it was like this big like moral problem we had in our product development class. So
dive in 2 weeks. Are Keurigs moral or immoral? I don't know. I've probably never been discussed before, so it could be new.
I mean, I still use them, so I don't know if that says about me.
So we are going to talk about what we are going to cover next time, which is very exciting. But for now, we're going to go on to the next video, which, again, is pretty similar to Matt's, and that is Daniel Dennett's. So let's see what he has to say, and this is one of the quote-unquote 4 horsemen in the atheist world.
All right, here we go.
I hate to tell you the conclusion I seem to be coming to. I'm embarrassed to tell you, but I seem to feel, if it's all physical, that free will there's something wrong with that definition, or
Exactly.
I can't deal with a traditional definition of free will under either scenario,
Right.
determinism or indeterminism, unless I add something extra and some non-physical stuff. Then I can get my free will.
I think that's right. I think we have to recognize that, sure, there are varieties of free will, the traditional varieties, which who cares whether we've got them? The varieties that matter, the varieties of free will worth wanting, as I've said, are perfectly compatible with determinism. Now, do we have to give up something? Yeah, we have to give up some of the ideology about freedom. We also have to give up something, and good riddance to it, about blame and responsibility.
That would scare some people.
I think so. They want to be absolutist about responsibility. I mean, the idea of just in the eyes of God, sin, that has to go. But what we replace it with is still a very rich and familiar concept. And that is, we're not deluded about our sense of our own capacity. We are determined to be the masters of our fate to a surprisingly gratifying degree.
So there is Daniel Dennett, and quite the intriguing phrase at the end there, that we are determined to be the masters of our fate. So
It's from Invictus, right? That poem.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
I don't know
Oh,
poetry,
I know.
but I'm maybe you're more of an expert. But anyway, if you have any comments about what Daniel said there in that particular quote, definitely let us know. But questions to go along with that. According to Daniel Dennett there, what do we have to give up in order to come to this truth about free will? So that question's pretty simple. He did just describe it in the video just to kind of recap. He said that basic understanding we have of free will, the one that kind of everyone uses when talking about the topic, we have to let go of pretty much the whole thing, of all of what it talks about. So the free will that we have different options to choose between, and we have the freedom, the ability to choose the one or the other or another, based on our ability to choose them, or that the ones that we are able to choose. So basically, we have to let go of that notion, but to bring in another notion that is familiar, that again, kind of like Matt Dillahunty was saying, that we are morally responsible agents. So, did you pick up anything else, kind of from what Daniel said in his comments?
Yeah, I think he's quite right in some aspects, but like he talks about how that we need to let go of our traditional way of thinking about free will, that we need to be the masters of our own soul. And that kind of speaks to me like kind of like Ayn Rand and that whole thought process of just striving forward for what you want. And it seems like a very subjective morality. And I can't see on his worldview where you can have this objective moral system. It comes down to whoever is strongest in that sense. Whoever has the strongest soul can go out and exert his will on others. So I think he's like he's saying that we need to let go of the sense that God is in control of morals and ethics, and how that is like a scary thing for most people, but we shouldn't fear that. And I think he's wrong in that aspect, that like you can't find morals outside of God, because time plus matter plus chance doesn't come up with an objective moral system. You can't pull yourself up by your own moral bootstraps, because at best you get a subjective morality, not objective morality.
Yeah, and even if we don't say God, because people can say, oh, God can mean different things, which is fair to say, we can say that at least it has to be something immaterial, outside of the physical realm,
Yeah.
which Daniel would be at least a materialist, maybe a physicalist, not really sure. But yeah, that would be kind of the least requirement for having that kind of moral free agency, like you're saying.
Right.
But then, we can get to the idea that this free agency that we have does point to God, or something that has the characteristics of God that's described in Christianity, or maybe in other religions too. It doesn't have to be necessarily the Christian God, depending on the argument that's being made. But we are going to get to that later on, much more in depth.
Right. I kind of agree with him that if we do have a real sense of free will, we need to have something that transcends the physical world. Now, I know that there's some people that think that we can actually have free will in this world, and I myself have a hard time believing that, I guess. But I guess I haven't dived deep enough down to find my affirmative place in that free will world.
Sure. So one person said, if I can grab the comments here, to give up, as Daniel said, we have to give up certain things. To give up would require agency. So that's just making the point that language used in these things that atheists are saying oftentimes point to this idea that we do have the ability to choose, do have this free agency. So that's something to kind of look for when you start hearing these views, or when you're in conversation with someone about the topic of free will, if they deny that we do have free will. Those are certain words to listen for in that process. Yeah, and then Tom says he disagrees about the whole objective morality that you're saying, that it could point to God because it could be an undiscovered law of nature. Again, that's not really the topic we're specifically covering tonight, but that is kind of an objection that's saying that, okay, let's say there is free agency or objective morality. Well, that could be described by God, or it could be described by other things. And that is something we're going to hit on at our next dive. So tonight is focused especially on looking at the views of atheists and what they say, and asking if their views are reasonable. But of course, there are a lot of areas to go to in this area of free will, and one of them is that concept of, does free will point to God's existence? So that is something we will be covering later on, or in another week. Okay, so let's go to another Christian view, and that is Frank Turek, our good friend who we talked earlier, who we may see later on this year in a debate. So let's see what Frank has to say about basically what Dennett and Dillahunty just talked about. Can you have free will in some sense on a materialistic worldview?
But let me go back. You said something that I just want to verify. You said it goes on in my mind. Do you believe the mind is the brain, or do you believe that the two are distinct?
The mind is the brain. There's nothing but the molecules inside my head.
Well, then why should you believe anything you think?
Why shouldn't I believe? Just because it's part of, as I said before, I feel the love for my kid. That is a real thing because it takes place in my brain. Is consciousness an illusion? It might be. It might be the mind playing tricks on me, but I kind of like that illusion. I think it's fun. And you might kind of like your illusion of God, and you might think it's fun, and it's very good. But do not influence my world with your God, because it's part of your imagination.
So I have an imagination then.
Yeah.
I'm not just a brain in a vat. I have a mind that can actually make decisions, free will decisions, and you can too?
It can.
Well, then you're not a materialist then, if you believe that you have free will.
Why not?
Because if everything is the result of a previous natural cause determined by the laws of physics, then you don't have free will. But if you think you have free will, then everything that you think isn't determined by the laws of physics. You are a self that decides to do things.
Does the believing God give you a free will?
What's that?
Do you have a free will as a God believer?
Oh, I think everybody has a free will, whether they're believers or not. My point is on atheism. If atheism is true and we're just molecules in motion, there is no free will. That's one of the things that troubled Einstein the most. He was a materialist, and he said, how can we have free will if everything is molecules in motion? That's what I think is the fatal flaw in atheism. Because it tries to say everything is material, but then it steals from a theistic worldview in order to argue against it. It tries to say, well, I've got all these reasons that I'm freely coming to a conclusion that these reasons are true to say that theism is false. But in order to come to a free will decision, you have to assume you're not just a brain. You have to assume you have a mind. You have to assume you have a soul.
Yeah, so there we go on Frank's comments. And some of you had comments to make as that was playing. One person said here that it's kind of related to like presuppositional apologetics, which is just talking about that there is, we need to start at a certain, on a certain ground in terms of truth, in terms of our assumptions or starting points, and that's what God exists, or that there is basically objective morality. We need to kind of start at that point, and there may have been undertones in that, but Frank himself is not focused on presuppositionalism. But in order to address this topic, he may have needed to make comments that kind of seem to go close to that range. Mm-hmm. So it's something to point out. And then the same, and Aaron said as well, Frank is a mixed martial apologist, MMA. So Frank is very, you can say, assertive in the way that he talks about things, and I like for me, it's just kind of a personal story. I didn't see Frank as like my favorite person necessarily in the apologetics area because of that. But then I met him personally, and I started watching him do debates with atheists. And I saw that even though we have kind of contrasting personalities, that I don't have that assertive kind of personality or way that I approach conversations with others. For Frank, it ends up being very effective in the way that he can go about debates and talk about these important issues with people in a way that is engaging and can really get people to listen in. And I think God can use him in really awesome ways in that way because of the way that God created him with that kind of personality. So that's just goes to show that people have different strengths and different personality types, and that's totally okay. They're all for different purposes.
Yes, and I think it's important to learn how to deal with those.
Yes,
not just in apologetics, but all walks of life.
Yeah.
And I did see in that clip that they had a rock climbing wall in the back, and I was just thinking, in our debate, we need to host it there, and then we'll see who can rock climb better, and then I'll determine the debate outcome.
Yeah, I think the winner will already be determined.
Okay,
so I don't know if there would be a point really. Anyway, so we've gone off the rails a bit.
Sorry,
it's fine. This is live, it happens.
Yeah.
With Frank, he kind of described there that. Sorry, can you explain or I'm trying to think of what he was describing towards the end there.
Oh yeah, the thought there was that if you're completely determined, you can't actually make positive statements about what's true or not. You can't have these kind of higher order systems and have a good basis for judging that they're real and right. And Frank is just saying that they are illusory, that we might feel like they're real, but in a sense they are they're facades, and we can't reliably base our judgment off of that.
Yeah.
So it's like, how do you even think and try to convince someone when you don't even know if logic works? I'm just predetermined to believe all of these things. So how does one even operate in such a world?
Yeah, so that's when Frank brings his idea, in which he based the book off of, that atheists sometimes take a kind of a concept and they kind of own it. They say that, hey, this is in our worldview, but really they're stealing the basis for that concept from a theistic worldview, such as Christianity. And that was what Frank said here, and maybe that relates to what we heard from Dillahunty and Dennett as well, that they said, well, we have determinism, but we also have this sense of free will that really matters. Well, are they getting that concept of free will from their deterministic worldview, or is it better explained in another worldview, such as the Christian worldview? Mm-hmm. So that's another question to consider with these views.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a comment there. If there is free will, why can't it also be explained by an undiscovered law of nature? It seems like anything that can be explained by the supernatural could also be explained by an unknown natural explanation.
Yeah, so that comment is pretty similar to the one we discussed earlier, where if there is free will, let's assume that there is, then it may point to God, or some people say, oh, it might point to something else just as much. And again, that's not something we're here to cover tonight, but we will be covering.
Right, and I think just on materialism, you're not going to find that somewhere else. Like if it's just functions going through, like you can't, like there's no such thing as finding a free will law. Like that's just not coherent.
Yeah, I think
because it's all determined all the way through. That just seems so incoherent to me.
Sure. But, yeah, I don't really want to get too much into that, but to be fair to the person arguing, someone who would make that argument might say that, yeah, we don't have a basis behind knowing that there is a supernatural kind of law like that, or like some sort of law out there that gives us free will, but we equally don't have really any basis to say that God exists. So it's really equal in terms of the lack of rationality behind it. But again, that's a totally different topic, and I just want to be fair to the person making that point.
Sure.
So let's move on to Sam Harris, and this is probably the most prominent person in this area in terms of the quantity that he talks about with free will, and also just being out there in terms of popularity.
Right, he is a neuroscientist, so that kind of gives him a good backing for trying to make these judgment calls.
Yeah, so this is a little bit of a longer video, and we wanted to give more time to Sam Harris just because he is pretty much the guy out here in the atheist community for this. And we're going to kind of see an example of him bringing us through his view in a very personal way, which I think will be helpful in discussion. So let's see what Sam has to say. And again, this video is probably about 5 or 6 minutes long, just to prepare you for that.
Yes, with its neurophysiological underpinnings, there would still be no room for free will. Because you still wouldn't know why it is you do what you do. And again, this is a fact you can notice about yourself directly. Let's run a little experiment. Think of a city, anywhere in the world. You can choose any city you want. And now, of course, I could have primed you. I could have artfully placed cues in my speech in the last few minutes that would make you more likely to think of Las Vegas, for instance. So just to be on the safe side, don't pick Vegas. But pick a city, any city, and just pay attention to what this conscious process is like. Now, the first thing to notice about this is as free a decision as you are ever going to make in your life. Okay, you have all the cities in the world to choose from, and I'm just asking you to pick one. Now, several cities have probably occurred to you, and just focus on one. So everybody got a city? All right, well, I'm sorry to say that you all picked the wrong city. Don't ask me how I know this, but I do. So I just want you to do this again, just so you can see what the process is like. Pick another city. Can't be the first. And notice what that experience is like. Okay. Did you see any evidence for free will? Now, we better be able to find it here. I mean, if it's not here, it's not anywhere. So let's look for it. First, let's set aside all those cities whose names you don't know and therefore could not have picked. Okay, because you couldn't have picked one of those if your life depended on it. There's no freedom in that, obviously. Okay? And then there are many other cities whose names are quite well known to you, but which simply didn't occur to you to pick. I mean, for instance, perhaps Cairo didn't occur to you. You absolutely know that Cairo is a city, but for whatever reason, your Cairo circuits were not engaged. Okay? As a matter of neurophysiology, Cairo was not in the cards. So I want you to think about this. Were you free to choose that which did not occur to you to choose? Based on the state of your brain a few moments ago, Cairo was not coming. Okay, where is the freedom in that? Of course, if you did think of Cairo, you should consider yourself a genius. Now, so you probably thought of several cities, and then let's say you thought of Paris and New York and Tokyo. And then you thought, I love Paris. I'm going to go with Paris. And the last minute you thought, no, Tokyo, I'll go with Tokyo. And now this is the sort of decision that motivates the idea of free will. You've got two or more choices, and you're picking between them, and it's just you and your thoughts. There's no coercion from the external world. You are doing it, apparently. But when you look closely, I think you'll find that you are in no position to know why you picked what you picked. In this case, why you chose Tokyo over Paris. I mean, you might have some additional story to tell about it. You might think, well, I had Japanese food last night, and so I remembered it, and I picked Tokyo. Now, of course, we know from psychology that these kinds of stories are rather often false. Whenever people are manipulated in a lab, they always have some tale to tell about why they did what they did, and it never bears any relationship to the actual variables that cause them to behave that way. So you give people, you can cause people to like one person more than another, or to cooperate more in economic games by simply giving them a hot beverage to hold as opposed to a cold one. And they never tell you that the reason they were biased as they were was because the temperature of the cup in their hands. Okay, psychology is replete with evidence that we are very poor judges of why it is retrospectively, why it is we do what we do. But even if you're right in this instance, okay, even if your choice of Tokyo over Paris is based on your memory of having Japanese food last night, okay, you still can't explain why you remembered having Japanese food last night, or why the memory had the effect that it did. Why didn't it have the opposite effect? Why didn't you think, well, I just had Japanese food last night, so let's go with something new, let's go with Paris? The thing to notice about this is that you, as the conscious witness of your inner life, are not making these decisions. You can only witness these decisions. I mean, you no more picked the city you settled on in subjective terms than you would have if I picked it for you. I mean, so there was this first moment. I said, pick a city. And there's this hiatus where nothing has occurred to you. And then the names of cities start to get promoted into consciousness for reasons you can't inspect. And you can't choose the cities you think of before you think of it. I mean, it's almost like me saying Tel Aviv, Vancouver, Paris, and you simply hearing the words in consciousness. So if you pay attention to how thoughts and intentions arise and how decisions get made moment to moment, I think you can see that there's no evidence for free will, that actually our experience in life is compatible with the truth of determinism.
Okay, so there we see this whole demonstration that Sam Harris went through, or took us through, to show on his view that really there is no evidence for free will when we really think about how thoughts come to our minds and how that whole process works. So a question to ask after watching that is, well, he described a lot in the video of well, let's say you picked some Chinese city because maybe you had Chinese in the past, or really there could be a whole variety of factors why you picked a certain city that you don't know about. So basically the question is, how can you know that you had a free will to make the decision when you don't know all of the factors that led up to that point? That's what I caught of a lot of what he was saying.
So you're like, I'm trying to understand. So he's saying that you need to know all of the predetermining factors prior to making a judgment to know whether you have free will. Because in that sense, you need to be omniscient.
Mm-hmm.
You need to know all of the options. You need to know all the causalities just to make sure that this one wasn't, and then that's going to prove out free will. Is that what he's saying?
Yeah, to me, it seems like almost like an agnostic view on the issue. He's saying that, well, there's all this stuff beforehand that we don't know about, so how can you say that you have free will by picking the right city, or picking the city that you do? Mm-hmm. But at the same time, like you said, we're not omniscient. We don't know all of the factors, as he expressed. So how do we know that we are fully determined in that decision, as he is saying? Mm-hmm. So I guess it really brings up questions, just the way that he approaches that issue by turning to that sense of, there's a lot that we don't know in terms of what motivates us to choose something over the other.
Sure.
Yeah.
What city did you choose, Jeremy?
Well, I chose, when I was watching this the first time, I chose Beijing. And part of the reason, to be honest, was I've been working on China stuff for work. So Beijing's one of the cities that comes up. But then again, I could have picked Shanghai. So, there is a factor behind it, but am I fully determined in that decision? According to Sam Harris and what he's saying, I don't know if we can really know on that view. But maybe you have different thoughts. Definitely let us know what you think about that whole thought experiment that Sam took us through. And what did you choose for a city? And do you think that was a convincing way of showing that we really don't have evidence for the existence of free will? One person said that he chose not to think of a city, Aaron. So I thought that was pretty funny. So I guess I don't think Sam thought out that scenario in his little demonstration.
Very good rebuttal. Very good.
Yep. So Tom says here, Sam is saying you can only choose from the options that come into your mind, which you didn't choose. So I mean, that is part of the deal with Sam Harris and what he was saying, that only certain things come to our minds because we only have limited knowledge about the cities in the world. By the way, if you know all the cities in the world, congrats. You're probably one of the smartest people in the world. But most of us do not know all the cities, so only certain ones have the ability to come to our mind in that moment. However, once you get to that point of different cities coming to mind, well, I guess the question is, yeah, we have those constraints in there that we can't have all of the options available in a sense in our minds, but with the options that we do we have the free ability to choose between those? And I think that's really the question that we're getting at here, and with what Sam is describing. And then Sarah pointed that out in the comments, yet we can choose between those options that we are aware of. So that's a good summary of that point we were just making.
Yeah, if we were only able to recall one city ever at a time, then it'd be a little bit more challenging to say that we have free will. Because Cairo, that city, and then you just really don't actually have a choice. But when you're able to, hold in your consciousness two options and then pick one, it seems like it's a little bit more complicated than what Sam is making it out to be.
Right, yeah. And I got really excited here because Sarah, the same person, said, "You would never believe it, but I chose Cairo." I've never seen that video before.
Genius.
So we'll have to call Sam Harris up, and you have to give you a prize or something. I don't know. That was pretty funny. Okay, so let's go on. I'm just kind of looking at the comments, seeing if there's anything else to note here, but we have just
11 minutes.
Yep, that's fine. We have one more video to cover, and that is someone who you're all probably familiar with, Ravi Zacharias, and he has some thoughts on this whole issue of free will, especially related to, I guess to all the things we talked about. But let's see what Ravi has to say about this whole deal. Excuse me, I'm going to go to the right spot. Okay, go ahead.
Reasons, which I was unfortunate, I think. At Cambridge, I listened to a talk at the Lady Mitchell Hall in 1990 by Stephen Hawking. As you know, he can't speak. He uses a speech synthesizer. His whole talk was on determinism and freedom. And you know what he concluded? That the tragedy with scientific materialism, if we take its assumptions, is that we are not free, we are totally determined. That was the world's leading physicist at that time saying, the very thing you're asking of the Christian faith, he pinned on your backs as scientific materialists. You can go right online and trace it. Lady Mitchell Hall, 1990, somewhere around March, April, May, that time. I was in attendance. And he said, the only escape I have is since I don't know what has been determined, I may as well not be. The whole auditorium moaned and groaned with an escape hatch that he gave for himself after telling us that we were completely determined. That's Berlinski's issue. That is actually even what people like Dawkins will concede, or Pinker. You read Steven Pinker and the others. So totally determined. So the question is, were you free to ask this question? Yeah.
I don't believe any of us actually have free will because we are strictly material.
So you're actually, as a machine automaton, asking me this question?
We are all made up of our past experiences.
Okay, but you're not free then. You're not free. You're not making a truth statement.
My truth statement. I mean, what I'm saying is our memories and our states.
No, hear me carefully.
Okay.
If you're totally determined,
yes,
you're pre-wired to think the way you do.
Nature versus nurture, yes.
Sorry?
Nature versus nurture.
Nature versus nurture.
Yes.
Regardless, the nurture may provide a different environment, but the nature is you're hardwired to come out with a certain conclusion. Out of flux, nothing but flux. You know, what you put into the computer, the ultimately is going to come out. But you have to ask yourself, are you making a truth claim? If you are making a truth claim, you're rising above the bondage of total subjectivity. And the moment you claim a truth claim, you're violating determinism. And so
we're going to stop the video right there. And Ravi just kind of expressed a lot of things that we have talked about the last hour and a half, that when it comes to someone who has a deterministic view, can they really make a truth claim, a rational claim about the world when they were determined to say whatever it is that they are saying in that moment? So I think that's really the big question that we're getting to here. And the thing that Frank said earlier is really, on his view, the fatal flaw of atheism, of being able to describe what's happening there.
Yeah, and I agree with that. And I like what Ravi was trying to get at, that, you know, sure, you might have some things that are your nature and some things that are from your nurture, but in a sense, like, if it's all determined, it's all nature. Like, you might have some things in your life that changed you as you were going, but it's still part of nature. So if you're just on a materialistic framework, it is only nature. It's all determined from that sense. You're not going to find indeterminacy that you can slip in free will. You know, there's talks of on the quantum level indeterminacy, but I think that's more like an epistemological indeterminacy rather than ontic. Because I deal with that in my work. It's like, oh, I can't actually determine this, but it's not because there's something that's truly random. It's just with the tools that I have, I'm not able to measure something with certainty and find all of these interactions. There's just things that are confounded.
Right. Yeah. Well, thanks for your thoughts there. So I'm just reading a comment from Tom here. If you make a choice for a reason, then it's determined by the reason. If you make it for no reason, it's random. How can any decision be free if it can only ever be determined or random? So that's like an argument that he's making, saying that there is no possibility of free will because it's either this or this. It's the dilemma that we're talking about, where free will isn't even an option in there. And I don't know if that will be something we'll be able to really expand on a lot, but I don't know if you want to like think about that at all. But so making a choice for a reason, he's saying that
it's still based off of reason and logic, basically.
Well, he's saying that the reason determines the outcome of the action that we take. So there is kind of a determinism in our actions because it's led by reasons, or it's random because we don't have a reason. We just kind of pick something out of nothing. I'm not totally like kind of convinced by that point at the moment, just because of like when we're talking about determinism, we're not really talking about reasons leading to a decision. I think we would still say that there's a sense of free agency or free will in that process of rationalizing, in thinking what is the best choice to make here, and being able to make that choice with reasons, but the person making that choice was still a free agent in that process.
Right.
So, yeah.
One doesn't always choose the optimized solution for every possible problem that they encounter, right?
What was that? Sorry.
So, like, if you're trying to use reason to get to something, like, there's normally an optimized solution that, like, oh, this is the best thing, I'm gonna do it. Sometimes we don't choose the best thing, and I think there's still some free agency in that.
Right. Yeah. So if you have reasons behind it, it's not necessarily the best reasons or the best decision to make based on the reasons. Is that kind of what you're?
Yeah, perhaps. I think I'll think about that one a little bit.
Okay.
Thanks, Tom.
Good. Yeah, Tom, that's a new kind of view that we haven't really seen from these atheists or heard otherwise. Yeah. So and you're very good at doing that sort of thing. So we really appreciate.
Yeah, Tom has good questions.
Yeah, for sure.
Not that the rest of you don't, but you guys have good questions too.
Yep. So Aaron says we look outside ourselves for truth. So that's the idea that there's stuff going on around us that we're looking towards to determine what is true about reality. It's not just this internal, brain state kind of process, and that's all that there is. There is this objective reality, this reality outside of us that we're observing, that is helping us make the proper decisions and leading us to what is true, basically. So, and with that, I think we need to close up now the videos and whatnot. And just a second here, let's see if there's any other quick comments. Okay, so I think we're going to talk a little bit about the implications of this just for a minute or two, and then go to any more comments that need to be said. We'll go a little over, which is fine. We started late. I think that's totally fine in a live stream situation. So I guess the question is, why is this important? Why are we talking about this topic? And I think we've seen some of it just in the course of watching these videos, that this is a topic that is very out there in the academic environment. And maybe you haven't had a conversation about this topic with anyone before, but that doesn't mean that these ideas aren't out there. And when top atheists such as Sam Harris talks about free will and kind of denies that it exists, and then pretty much all the other atheists that we talked about said the same thing, except maybe in some limited cases free will exists. But across the board, there was a denial that we are truly free agents. Well, then that thought is going to infiltrate to the culture in some way. So in that sense, it probably will come up in a way in conversations that you have with non-Christians. And maybe you can think of an example of a specific case where that would happen, but we already saw that when Frank Turek was debating someone, or he had a session and had a Q&A, someone asked him a specific question on free will. And oftentimes that is an objection. Like, how can you say that God exists and has control over everything, and that we have free will? So I think there are a lot of scenarios where this topic can come up. But tonight we wanted to really cover this specific area of determinism and what atheists think about this topic of free will. I don't think it's, I can't say that this topic is often discussed in church or anything like that. For Christians, I haven't been a part of a discussion like this, so I really enjoyed being able to think about a topic in a new way. And hopefully this will help as perhaps this topic comes up in future conversations. Like for me, I know of at least the general things that we can talk about, like, does rationality exist? Is it compatible with determinism? So, do you have any other comments about the importance of this?
Yeah, I've had this come up at work, just because we talk a lot about understanding things, because we design things that test and help people understand the world around them. But part of that is oh, well, what if everything is determined? Then your thoughts are actually determined on how you're going to understand the world. So in that sense, science kind of falls on its face, because you can't actually rationally choose between the right option, if that makes sense. So in a sense, if what these guys are saying, like Frank and Ravi, you can't make these truth claims anymore, and how do you then have a good scientific backing for your atheistic worldview, or just science in general? So I think you need to have that free agency to be able to have that rationality behind it. So yeah, it does come up at work sometimes. I remember sitting in a Detroit airport and chatting with my coworkers about this.
Wow.
So and in school it came up too, and also in ethics. So I think it is a very important topic to think through for yourself and for others, and what the implications are.
Yeah, totally. And speaking of science, Aaron posted a comment a little bit ago that said, even scientists peer review thoughts they have to see if the conclusion is reasonable. So that is a really good thought, because people who are atheists oftentimes really hold science in high esteem. So that would be a good thing to point out to someone claiming determinism, that scientists go through this peer review process. Like, why does that have to happen on a deterministic view? And then Jeremy, I'll read his comments, and we'll probably be pretty close to closing up. Greg Boyd has talked about how free will does assume a lot of determinism. Determinism actually undergirds free will. There's a lot that is determined about me, my genetic makeup, where I was born, and other things. But the very fact that I don't have to make a decision about an infinite number of things means that I can make a decision about a finite amounts of things. So that kind of alludes to what we talked about earlier, that we do have physical constraints, and that we do have constraints in the sense of we only can only the things that we know come to mind and are possible things to choose from via our free will.
Yeah, and I think most people believe that. I've watched some stuff by Craig, and how he talks about there's a soft determinism in this world that we just can't get around. I just can't go and speak Mongolian right now just because I don't know that. There are constraints, but there are some things that we are able to freely choose. So it's not just Greg Boyd and the open theist that believes that.
Sure. Yeah. So I think we will kind of end there in terms of our main discussion. And other than that, we have a visitor coming in, which is exciting. But so we're going to close in prayer. And Matt, would you like to close us? And then or I can.
No, I for sure can.
Okay, sounds good. And otherwise, we'll give a few announcements afterward, and then we'll close up our time. So thanks for joining us, and we'll hopefully you can stick around a few minutes for the end.
Yeah, if you guys want to pray with us. Yep. God, thank you for today. Thank you for this time together that we can learn, understand from one another, and hear from some great minds from all around the world, and how they've thought through this thing on determinism and free will. I pray that we can look to you and see you and how you've created us, Lord. I pray that you would encourage us this week, Lord, and help us to be signs of you and to bear good fruit for you, Lord. So be with us, guide us, show us your love, Lord. We ask this in your name, Jesus. Amen.
Amen.
So it looks like you guys are going to have a fun time in 2 weeks. And
Yes.
I won't be here, unfortunately. I'll be traveling.
Yes. And I believe it's a China
China,
city like you were talking about earlier.
Yes.
So maybe that led you to choose a Chinese city. I don't know.
Oh, I did not choose a Chinese city.
Yeah. Well, you wanted to try something different.
That's true. I did want to try something different.
Okay. Anyway, well, jokes aside, we have a few things to kind of announce before we leave here. One thing is just again, we have a potential public debate coming up way later this year. But we will be seeking out help for that, so stay tuned for that and just start thinking about how you may be able to help in an event like that. And by the way, we would need video and people help with sound and security, people like that. Anyway, and in 2 weeks, like Matt pointed out, we are going to have an exciting meeting. As we turn on the lights, because it's a sign that we gotta go here. That we have the question: does free will point to God, or does it point to God's existence? And we're going to have an expert, so to speak, in that field join us and give his thoughts on that topic.
You?
So of course it is. No, I'm definitely not a free will expert. But yeah. We'll announce that on our Facebook group. So if you're not part of our Facebook group, definitely join that and you'll get more details. We will have part of it live streamed and hopefully more time to plan out how that's going to happen. But people will also be able to attend. And we're going to have only part of it will be live streamed. So part of it will be, interacting with our guests, with the people there. But we will have a time where of having a session where this person gives his views, and then we have a Q&A, stuff like that.
Is that going to be live streamed?
That part will be, but there will be
other. I can watch.
Yes, yeah. There will be other parts of the night that are not live streamed. So there is still reason to come if you're in the Minneapolis or Minnesota area.
Yeah, don't be a bum like me skipping.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly. And yeah, that's pretty much what we got. So if you're not joined or following us on our Facebook page or Instagram page, that's where we post a lot of content beyond these meetings. So definitely check those out, Twin Cities Apologetics. We have a podcast as well, if you look up that in iTunes or YouTube. And we have some exciting ones coming up there too. So a lot going. Yeah,
it's more like a vlog, isn't it?
A vlog?
Vlog? Video blog, video podcast?
It is a podcast. Like the format is very much podcast-like.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
But it's shot with video.
Right, yeah. Oh, yeah, that's true. So it's a video podcast, hence the YouTube functionality. Yeah, exactly. And Facebook page as well. So that ends our time tonight. Thank you all for joining in. Definitely appreciate it. And feel free to reach out with any questions about Twin Cities Apologetics or some of these events that we're talking about that are coming up. Otherwise, stay warm and stay safe. If you're in Minnesota, if you're in other places, well, weather permitting, whatever the case might be, do whatever you need to do.
It was a good choice to be there.
Yes, exactly. Some people are in Florida and vacationing, and So enjoy the rest of your week, and we will see you at our next dive.
Yeah, peace out.
All right, bye, everyone.
Bye. Oh, there we go.